In fact, we do quite often say that you actually can't make a play worker. You either are or you aren't. Play work is an attitude. It is a way of working. And it's a form of working that some people just cannot do because they don't have that mindset.
Hi, this is Rusty Keeler, and you're listening to the Play Nature Podcast, where we talk about play, nature, playing in nature, and the nature of play. I'm glad you're here. Let's have a listen. Marc Armitage. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Great to see you.
It's all right seeing you. I wouldn't say it's great, but it's fine.
Yeah,
it's
fine.
early in the morning.
That's right. It's early where you are. Are you in Melbourne now?
I am indeed in Melbourne, yes, at home.
Australia? Yes. But you are not an Australian.
No, I'm from the People's Republic of Yorkshire.
That's right. I just saw Monty Python Meaning of Life, and it starts off, it was like, in the third world, and then it's like Yorkshire.
Yes, exactly. We're very proud of that.
Yeah, you made it. Yay. Well, I'm so excited to see you here face to face.
So you should be.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, everybody is when they see you. And yeah, so no, I'm super excited. In fact, I think when I was first just dreaming of having a podcast, I was like, yeah, I could interview all those great people I know, like Marc Armitage.
I thought you were going to say, and all those great people, and
yeah, right. And, you know, our Marc Armitage, too. Oh, my gosh. Yay. Well, here, I'll just read your bio, which is short and sweet, but says it all here. Marc Armitage is a play worker. Let that one sit. But play worker, play advocate, and friend of play, currently based in Australia. So maybe why don't we just start off, our paths have crossed a few times, which has been awesome, both here in Ithaca and the States and some play conferences here and there. And then I got to go to Australia on a trip, and I got to hang out with you for a couple days in Melbourne too, which was awesome and amazing, still inspired by. But why don't, I think we're going to have a big talk about, I'd love to have a big talk about playwork and your background and, what play is to you, what a play worker is, and how you're spreading that to Australia and the world and beyond.
Playwork is two different things. It's a profession and it's a way of working. And it's a profession that has its roots going as far back as the 1860s and 1870s, but modern playwork comes from the period immediately after the Second World War, so late 1940s, early 1950s. It begins in the United Kingdom mainly, but then has spread around the world, especially the modern form, including here in Australia and in the United States, amongst other places. But it's also a particular way of working with children. And the way that it's slightly different to other fields of work is that playwork has no agenda to fill. Our only agenda, if you like, is to provide space and time for children to play in the way that they would play if they weren't with us. And if we do have any form of outcomes to be achieved, it's only really in terms of funding streams and what the funders are looking for. Playwork as a profession itself is not really interested in why children play. It's more interested in whether they can or cannot.
And then how to create the conditions to help them.
Exactly. Yeah. The space
Okay.
is the thing that creates the play opportunities within a given space more than anything else.
Yeah, that's really interesting because so much we hear people trying to back up plays, it does this, it's, it stimulates that, it's this kind of growth and brain development and all that kind of stuff. But I think I'm kind of like with you, like, I don't play for play's sake, but play.
Yeah, you could summarize it by saying if you wanted to be really hard, and purist about it that we don't really care. If they can play, that ticks the box for us. Now, that's not to say that we're not interested in what positive and negative results there are from children playing, but we're more fixated on whether they can actually play or not than the reason why they would do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, how's it looking for play these days and that play work perspective?
Well, there's obviously there's two different words there. There's the play and the play work bit, which are both different. To deal with the play work bit first, possibly. Play work is struggling a little bit as a profession at the moment. In the United Kingdom, we've had an austerity budget for almost 20 years now, which has really cut local authority budgets to the bone. And since as local councils are the principal providers of playwork provision, it means that playwork and playwork jobs are really struggling in the UK. I know in the US, there's been a huge increase in interest amongst people around playwork for the last decade to 15 years, but that also seems to have slowed down a little bit. But I suspect that that's just because people are tired after running like mad for 15 years and just entered a natural little dip. In Australia, things are going great guns at the moment. There's an awful lot going on nationally and within the states in terms of playwork. So it's a bit of a new wave going on in terms of playwork in Australia at the moment.
Hmm.
As for the word play, well, because play is like breathing, it's never going away, despite the fact that we have plenty of people saying, children don't play like they used to. They don't play like I did when I was a kid. Well, weirdly, people have been saying that for as long as there have been children around. It isn't true. It's not going to be true. Play changes. The place where it takes place may change, but play itself as a behavior will never go away because it's so integral to both humans and other animals.
So what is play?
Oh, the easy questions first, Rusty. I like to start with the easy questions first. Well, the answer to the question "what is play" really depends upon who you ask,
Okay.
because play in terms of provision tends to be driven by agendas. So whatever the agenda is of the people that you're talking to is going to affect the way that they see the word play.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in an early years context, if you say to people, what is play? They're going to turn around and say, well, play is learning. Learning and play are inseparable. The two are one and the same. Whereas if you go to primary school, elementary school context, and turn around to the educators there, who are in many respects doing a very similar job to the fellow educators in the early years sector, and say, what is play? They're going to turn around and say, well, play is a break from learning that happens at recess, playtimes. It's got nothing to do with learning itself. So even just there, you've got two work sectors which are very similar in practicalities, and yet they see play as not just being two different things, but two diametrically opposed things. In one case, play is learning, and in the other, play is a break from learning. And we get that no matter which work sector you look at. Everyone brings its own unique agenda, and so it has its own unique view on play. To give you another couple of examples, people in the physiological world, that's the physical people, will turn around and say, well, play is about building bones and muscles and heart, lungs, etc., etc. So play has to involve lots of movement in order for it to work and to make sense. Whereas go and speak to the cognitive people, and they will say, well, play is about building neurons and bridging between neurons. And the way that you do that is by thinking and heavily engaging in thought stuff, which doesn't involve much moving around. So again, two diametrically opposed ways of looking at the word play. And it changes completely when you ask children what their opinion of play is. And there's a very kind of common answer that children give, universal, which is different to these other work sectors because, as I say, they give their definitions based on their agenda. But ask children what play is, And their common answer is, I don't know, no idea. And it's because they're not interested. They
Hmm.
really don't care what it is or what it's for. They're really interested in whether they can do it or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Kids are weird.
I remember when I was in kindergarten and there were adults that would come in with clipboards and kind of observe and study and, and they were asking us detailed questions. They'd pull us aside and say, well, like what was going on with those blocks or what were you thinking? And I remember just thinking like we're not doing anything. What do you mean? We're just, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not what you think it is.
Yeah. And if you think about it, if you are deeply engaged in something that you're enjoying and you get well into a bit of a flow state, time does very strange things. It kind of disappears. And so if you've got a play space that's actually working well, children will leave the thing believing that they've only actually been there 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So in that context, there is no point in turning around to children and saying, how is it going? What are you doing? What are you learning? They've got no idea, partly because they don't care and partly because they've only been there for the blink of an eye.
Yeah. Yeah, the flow state. Okay, so then so the child's point of view is I'm not even thinking about it. I'm doing the thing. I'm involved in the thing, and I'm being.
Exactly, being in the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what's your definition of play?
I kind of don't have one. We have a very small number of heroes within the playwork sector, but one of those would be the British Colin Ward, who wrote a very famous book in the 1970s called The Child in the City.
Okay.
And his book was radical in that it did something that people have not really done very often in the context of children and children's lives, which is that he went to find where they were when they were not with adults to see what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of where he found them, he describes finding them everywhere. They were absolutely everywhere, including, of course, the places where they weren't supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But playwork, if it takes a definition of play by any kind of degree, it goes down the Colin Ward route. And Colin Ward described play as the thing that children do. And it kind of neatly summarizes that fact that children do play. It occupies more of their waking day than any other single form of behavior. But again, they've got no idea why they're doing it. It's just the thing that children do. In fact, we usually expand on that using Colin Ward's own words, but paraphrasing it a little bit by saying, play is the thing that children do all the time and everywhere.
Hmm.
And notice again, there's no agenda in there. There's no outcome to be found. There's just a recognition of the fact, excuse me, that children play.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the very, very few universal behaviors in human life. So if you know that old-fashioned quotation about, which I think is a Mark Twain quotation, the only sure things in life is death and taxes.
Yeah.
Well, you could add play to that word, because it is the only universal behavior that is common across human cultures all around the world.
Part of being alive as humans and other animals, yeah, the universality of play.
Exactly. Yeah. In the non-human world, for example, especially amongst mammals, in the 1970s, evolutionary biologists used to say most species of mammals play, but now they're very comfortable saying all species of mammals play because we've simply never found a mammalian species that does not play. And as we are mammals as well, it kind of brings up some very interesting parallels between us and other animals.
We share it with them, or yeah, we think it's
We think it's
a human thing, but it's a thing that we humans also do.
Exactly, and the archaeological evidence for playing has a long history. It goes back a long time.
What sort of evidence?
In an archaeological context, you usually say that there's two different forms of evidence for playing. One in the form of artifacts, objects.
Okay.
And in terms of objects, we find toys going back 5,000, 6,000 years, which have clear signs of wear and tear because they've been played with, and you could see them quite often as grave goods in prehistoric children's graves. And I find it ironic that the oldest example of a working wheel is a toy, and it's around 10,000 years old from Turkey, and it's a little toy chariot. So amongst objects like toys, we can see toys going back even further, but up to 20, 21,000 years is usually the figure given for the oldest toys. But then there are other objects that we can find. We can see evidence of collections of stones and piles of stones in the archaeological record. And the best evidence that we've got is actually footprint evidence. So, for example, there is a set of footprints that the archaeologist Mary Leakey found in the 1970s, which quite clearly show children playing. It shows exactly the same kind of signs that you would find if you took your own child to the beach, because the footsteps are going all over the place and around and around. And at one point, the obvious child's footprints in these completely disappear. And it's not until you look carefully that you realize that the footprints reappear in the footprints of one of the adults in this group. So they're kind of walking in step, exactly the same as we would see modern human children today doing. And those footprints are conventionally dated at 2.1 to 2.2 million years old.
Oh, man.
Because they're actually a pre-Homo species. It's Afarensis. And those are the oldest physical evidence that we've got for children playing.
Yeah, thinking about play as like flow, but also like the spirit of movement or being alive, or how you are moving through space, and it can be in a playful way. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, kids get bored very easily.
Yeah.
Which is why with this set of footprints and with others, the adult footprints are in a dead straight line because they're going from A to B.
Yeah.
And one of the things that gives away the fact that the children within these footprints are playing is the fact that they're not going in a straight line.
Right.
They're all over the place. They're disappearing at points to explore things and then coming back and then whizzing around the adults, etc., etc. Just exactly the same way as you would see children on the beach today.
Yes. Yeah.
And I can imagine that the adults in those footprints are expressing exactly the same frustrations that the adults today express.
Come on, quit fooling around. We're late.
Exactly. Yes. What are you doing?
It's getting dark. It's past your bedtime. That is funny. Yeah. So the spirit of play. Well, and then the adults. Okay. So you brought that up, the pre-Homo sapien parents or adults. And yeah, that's interesting. It's like the different worlds or the collision of worlds, the child domain versus the adult domain, or where he was talking about children play everywhere. But so much of children's play now, or opportunities for play, does involve being around adults, maybe more than
increasingly so.
Yes. So then you could call that a collision with like the natural way of being, the natural flow of play and life, and that is wired within like life on this planet. But then the adults with like agendas, as you're saying, the agendas. So it feels like, circling back to Playwork a bit, of like Playwork as almost a mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, we do quite often say that you actually can't make a play worker. You either are or you aren't.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can teach people all the technical stuff to do with playing until it's coming out of your ears. But play work is an attitude. It is a way of working. And it's a form of working that some people just cannot do because they don't have that mindset.
How does that mindset look on play?
That's a tricky one. That is a very shocking. But the late great Bob Hughes did a little experiment at one of his Played conferences in the late 1980s. He sent out a questionnaire to the play workers that were in the audience for the conference, and over the conference he asked them to write down, how did you get into Playwork? And there was a commonality. There was a common factor that came out, and the key word to summarize it was accidentally.
Accidentally.
Yeah, including myself and almost all the other play workers had never intended to become play workers. They'd fallen into it, and I think that's partly to do with people finding a home, finding somewhere that they feel comfortable with, because their idea of play and playing matches a play work ideal rather than the other way around. And I find it fascinating as somebody who's had the opportunity to go around the world working with play workers in different countries. It always amazes me that they're very, very similar people.
Hmm.
They're similar people, not just in terms of how they think, but they even dress in a very similar way.
I was going to say Converse, Chuck Taylor,
Yes.
sneakers.
Exactly. Torn down shirts, etc. And I think that is because of the fact that play workers are a particular breed.
Mm.
And there are people that I can think of that have tried to be play workers and failed because there is something within themselves that's got in the way.
Another way of looking, or a way that they think they're supposed to be with children, or they just, it's like you're talking about like the way.
Well, it is. I mean, there are some very top secret phrases that we use in play work that we don't discuss with non-play workers, because we know if we do, it will freak them out. And so it's not until you get to a particular level of knowledge that we start to talk about the really dodgy stuff.
Are we there?
I mean, in many respects, you are one of those people that we'd hold up as a bit of a success story in terms of play work, because I know that when you first got introduced to the idea of play work, it was something quite alien to you in terms of background and training, but you got it. You got it really, really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And people that are from outside the play work world, we can usually spot whether they're going to be into this thing or whether they're going to struggle with it or not. And some of our greatest successes have been in persuading people that are not play workers to actually understand what we do and how we do it.
Mm-hmm. Last interview was with this great place in Ithaca, friend Eric Herman, who runs this free science workshop. And it is this wild and woolly place indoors, and it's makerspace, tools, materials, animals, half mannequins, the whole deal. And it's staffed by these amazing adults. And I don't think they've thought of themselves as play workers, but as soon as I came in, I was like, this is a play work setting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I work with the early years sector a lot here in Australia. And in some respects, you would kind of think that early year settings are the absolute worst places to do play work, because there is a very rigid, hierarchical kind of outcome-based system going on. And yet play work works really well in a lot of the early years settings here, because people can see the value in that kind of approach. And early years people might find it hard to take some of the play work principles on, because some of them are diametrically opposed to their own training. But once they get it, they just step back and they go, right, I understand this. I understand why this is working the way it is, and it's been particularly successful. So it does work outside the play work settings and outside of play work as a profession. But there are points beyond which some people just could not go. And we have a thing in Playwork, for example, called the 3 frees, which we used to refer to as open access, which means that in order to be a proper Playwork setting, if you like, children have to be able to tick off the 3 frees, which is free at the point of entry. In other words, you don't pay to get in. You're free to choose what to do and what not to do, which most non-playwork settings can manage those first two fine without any problems. The third one's a bit of an issue because the third free is that you are free to leave as and when you wish. And for somewhere like an early years setting, a primary school, any other kind of place within the care sector, that's a complete no-no because you've got to wait to be picked up at a particular time by a registered person. And so that's a point sometimes when you tell people about the idea of children just leaving when they want, they're aghast. They say, "Well, how does that work? Surely that can't work."
Yeah.
But it works in a playwork context.
This free science workshop has that. Kids can wander in, they wander out. Nobody's signed in, nobody signs out. It's supposed to be part of the community access.
Yeah, it sounds very playworky.
Very playworky. I've seen that in certainly adventure playgrounds in London that are right smack in neighborhoods where kids are coming and going. I've seen the same thing in Copenhagen, just like riding their bikes, kids just riding their bikes from school, come to the adventure playground. That's a place to be and leave whenever you want to.
Yeah, and I know in the United States since the 1980s, 1990s, that increasingly children don't get to travel to school on their bike because schools will insist on, have you got insurance? Who are you coming with? Are you coming as a group? Are you coming as an individual? Whereas go somewhere like Holland and Germany and 8 o'clock in the morning, it's impossible to drive anywhere because the streets are full of kids on bikes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Here in Ithaca, not so many kids on bikes. There's some. I mean, it's a super pedestrian friendly. It's bike friendly, but flat, right down here. But one thing that I do hear is because I live on the way to the skate park, and I love hearing the sounds of the skateboarders on the road. Like there they are. They're commuting themselves. In some ways, that's one of the few three frees also. Like just
indeed. It's often said that the sign of a healthy community is to be able to see children moving around in the local neighborhood, making use of the whole community space.
Yes.
Particularly on their own. It's a sign that people feel comfortable, feel safe, feel able to move from A to B, etc., etc. And in a world that's dominated by the car, you don't see that.
Yeah. Yeah, things weren't designed. Ithaca is lucky because it's one of those towns that were, I guess that was originally laid out before the automobile. So it's a different scale. It's more human scale. And certainly, more modern places are so spread out and you have to be in a car. And there's there's deserts, play deserts where you have to, how do you get there? How do you?
Yeah. We see the rise of the destination playground at about the same time as the rise in motor traffic and fears of parents over children being out and about within their local community.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly we get the destination playground where the only way of getting there is by car, which means that the amount of time that you spend there is dictated by adults rather than by children.
Yeah.
And they're not the same as the local community play spaces within 400 meters of your front door that kids can easily get to themselves.
Yeah. And then you talk about open access. Who then can get to those ones? If you have a car, if you have parents willing to, or parents that have time to get you there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I found it an enormous shock. I lived in Sweden for a long time. I lived in Sweden for about 12 years. And one of the things that always surprised me there was you could turn around a corner in any housing estate and there's a play space. That's because the Swedish building regulations say that there has to be a play space for children under the age of 6 within 50 meters of their front door. And for children over the age of 6, there has to be a play space within 400 meters. And this really confused me at first because I thought this must be really, really expensive. I wonder how they managed to do this. Until I realized I was thinking with my British head, of course, because if you look just on one of the estates that I lived on, there were 6 times more play spaces than you would find in a typical British space, but the same number of pieces of play equipment. Because play equipment wasn't gathered into a single space surrounded by a fence that you had to go to. Play equipment was dotted around all over the place.
Yeah.
And that's how you justified the idea of the 50-meter, 400-meter kind of thing. And it meant that people got used to the idea that the whole community was effectively one big play space, rather than having a single play space surrounded by a fence plonked on the edge of the housing estate where the land is cheapest.
Yes.
It's a complete change in mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that gets into the children playing everywhere all the time. And so putting play, interesting play things where children are or where they can easily access everywhere all the time.
Yeah. I've just recently been writing about the linear playground. And linear playgrounds are, instead of gathering all the play equipment into one of these single space playgrounds and surrounding by a fence, saying to children, if you want to play, that's where you play. You can't play anywhere else. Linear playgrounds are based on the routes that children use on a regular basis, such as like the route to and from school, for example.
Yep.
And so the play equipment that would have been gathered together is now plonked along that route.
Yes.
So that children effectively play on the way to school and on the way back from school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is what they would have done.
That's right.
A few generations ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And they know all the places to climb, to balance, to hide, to go under the creek, the nearby creek to get through. And yeah, for sure. That's how I got to and from school. Thinking about that, or the city, like an overview city of a city and how children move through it, if they're able to move through it. And sometimes like with animals, they talk about like creating wildlife corridors. So I always thought it'd be interesting to look at a city and look at the child life corridors. How do they move through, and how can you dot it, and how can you, have playful elements along the way?
There's a very good example of that in London, in Mile End, where Mile End Park, which is a really big Victorian park, is on one side of a very, very busy road, but there's a smaller park on the other side of the road. And they're joined together by bridge, but the bridge is a green bridge. It has trees and grasses and flowers on the bridge. So you can effectively play as you go from one park to the other park without ever having to cross the road.
Yes, yeah. People are thinking about it. They're definitely, thinking about children in the space and in cities, and knowing that, we have to think about it. We don't want them just inside. And have you heard the organization 880 Cities out of Canada?
No. What's this one?
Yeah. I mean, the idea is if you design a city for 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds, it's going to be good for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like that idea. And that does make perfect sense. It's one of the reasons why I get very puzzled why people freak out about the idea of the 15-minute city. Because the 15-minute city just means that you've got everything that you need within a 15-minute walk of your own home.
Oh.
Which is the way that we all live at one point.
Yeah.
This idea of commuting for hours in order to get to a place of work would have been completely alien at one point. And producing a city like that has massive benefits for children, because everything that they need is within a 15-minute walk as well.
Yes. And
it means the city can be greener and a nicer place to just chill out and spend time.
Yeah. I saw, I was at the Children in Nature Network conference last year, Minneapolis, St. Paul. And, I've been following a bit of the work of the folks in Boulder, Colorado, because they've been doing a lot of great, like, child-friendly city stuff, in many ways leading the way over here in that, and creating incredible stuff, looking at the city as a whole. Where's play? Where's nature? But they did a great presentation of a new project that they're doing, that instead of trying to get huge amounts of money and create really amazing parks and, place them in different areas, it was the idea of doing lots of small, lots of small little places, little pathways through developments, through housing, through, the routes where children play. and spending,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah,
Lot,
and the child friendly cities network is a really good one to get into. People haven't done so already. They're very play friendly, very children friendly in general, and they do an awful lot of work, which is specifically to do with urban centres, and those urban centres are increasingly becoming the norm for children. The UN calculates that by the year 2050, 80% of people around the world will live in a large city,
wow.
and that includes children. So increasing children's natural environment would be brick, tarmac, concrete, steel, glass, etc. And greening up those cities doesn't just make it better for adults, it will make it much better for children as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I think about the High Line Park, the linear park in New York City, and
Yep.
just how I love that place. I love it, and so special. It's funny because it's gotten to this high end, like all these architects from all around the world, famous people are like, so they're building all because it's really revitalized these certain areas, and so it's become like fancified. But what it is itself is just like wild, like native plantings on the old
Yeah.
railroad bridge right through, elevated through the city. And it's like this wild thing. And it's almost like they just took like the random fields around here and plopped it there to
Yeah.
pasture.
The most successful playgrounds I've ever visited anywhere around the world have been the simplest playgrounds that are not just an architect's wet dream, but are actually playable spaces,
Yeah.
are the ones that are more successful with children. We had a bit of a backlash against this in the 1990s, a bit of a difference between Scotland and England, because the idea of forest schools and the influence of forest schools had arrived in the UK, but in a slightly different way, because the Scottish lot were more influenced by the Danish model, and the English and Welsh lot were more influenced by the Swedish and Norwegian model. And they're both quite different. And it led to things like a lot of Scottish playgrounds suddenly became completely devoid of anything that you would think of as a traditional play feature, a set of swings, a climbing frame, etc. Everything was based on the idea of the natural world, without realizing that that really confused children. The fact that there wasn't something in that space that said this
Mm.
is a place that you can come and play really did confuse children. And so it was suddenly realized that even if you made the greenest play space in the world, it needed some kind of boring, farty old traditional piece of play equipment in it for children to be able to go, oh, this is a place to play.
It's a kid's
Right,
place.
I get
Yeah.
it. Yeah, exactly. And that's the kind of thing that architects wouldn't necessarily think of, because of course they're thinking of the design perspective, and that's the thing that's uppermost in their mind. It comes all the way back down to the agenda conversation again. They're
Mm-hmm.
interested in something that is visually spectacular,
Mm-hmm.
as well as
Wow.
something that might be
Wow.
used.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. In the architectural book, Architectural Digest, looking through getting awards. It's fun to seeing that the creativity of the architects, but coming from the design world, same thing. I had that realization of like, wait, as a designer, I had the fun making the thing, making models, doing thinking of the ideas, but then once it's planted in the ground, children can use it only a few ways, versus the open-ended
yeah.
place of possible.
There was a time many, many years ago before you were born when I used to do a lot of public playground work.
Okay.
And one of the things that I used to try and persuade local councils to do was, when it came to building and designing playgrounds, was to do a pre-use and a post-use audit. The pre-use audit being about actually working out how is that piece of ground being used now. And if it's a playground that already exists and is just being redeveloped, how is that playground being used now? And the post-use audit being about really saying, has it worked? The stuff that we did, the changes that we made, has it actually worked? And that was a mindset that an awful lot of British playground designers and architects and local council providers found really difficult to get their heads around. Central continental Europe, not a thing. In fact, in Sweden, where I spent an awful lot of time, It's actually part of the law that if you make changes to an outdoor space, whether it be a playground or anything else, there has to be a children and young people's impact assessment to say, well, what effect is this going to have on young people?
Hmm.
And that's true within the play spaces as other housing areas. And I'll give you a practical example of that. There's a place in Stockholm called Rusty Keeler, the big eastern field. It's part of the Stockholm's medieval field system. And myself and a colleague were asked to do children and young people's impact on this space because it was going to be developed as a housing area. And pretty much everybody that we talked to about this space said we just don't see children here. Children don't use this space. But we found evidence of children's play absolutely everywhere. Dens, cubbies, forts, bits of collections of stuff that children had made were absolutely everywhere. And you could tell that this space was being used by different age groups because the evidence of the smallest, youngest children's use was all within the first edges of this space, within about 50 meters. And the evidence as you got further and further into this space was of older children and teenagers. And you could see that the older children would go deeper into the osteopathic than the younger children would. And it's just an indication that unless you actually, A, look for these kind of things, you will never find it. But B, you have to ask the right people. You could ask people that don't get this to go and have a wander, and they would walk past a fort within a bunch of bushes and never see it.
That's right. They haven't been trained in play detective work.
Forensic play work.
That's right, forensic play work. So it's happening. Play is happening.
I was going to say, what's happening? Everything's happening.
What's happening? Everything is happening, isn't it?
Yeah, the only trouble is we have to redo it every 5 or 6 years because adults have a terrible habit of forgetting. So you can tell them until you're blue in the face. Children still play. They still play like you did when you was a kid. They're still looking for the same places, the same experiences, and they nod and they go, oh, God, I get that. And then 5 years later, they've forgotten. There is a reason for this. And one of the analogies I've seen for this, I'll describe an experiment for you that was done in Manchester quite a long time ago, which I think is fascinating.
Okay.
It's a very, very long street in Manchester with children in the street playing, and a set of researchers at either end of the street who stopped adults that had walked down the full length of the street and said to them, without turning around, tell me what the children in the street that you just walked down were doing. And the majority answer that they got from people was, what children? Didn't even notice them. And there is a suggestion that once adults get to a certain point, children become invisible. And one of the reasons why they become invisible is because your kind of head actually knows that if most adults knew what children were getting up to or where they were doing it, they would stop them. It would stop them from doing that because it would be dangerous or be done in the wrong place or whatever. So by making them children invisible, they don't get the chance to stop. It's probably one of the reasons why it's very difficult for adults to drag up their own playtime. It's hard to get adults to remember what it was like to be a kid, what they did when they were children, because their heads are not working the same way. I have an analogy that I often use for this, which only old people ever get. Young folk don't understand this at all. But it's like turning around and saying that adult heads work in VHS, kids' heads work in Betamax.
Okay.
And if you're old, you'll get that.
Well, VHS and Beta were competing, and Beta was like the better one, but the VHS ended up being the way.
Exactly. Simple.
So, in this sense, you're saying that the adult's perspective kind of rules the day, even though it's may not be connected to reality.
Yeah, if you think about it, it's only in the last 3,000 years or so that children have begun to learn more from adults than they do from other children. Before that, before a day of organised schooling systems, children spend most of their time in the company of other children
Yeah.
and learn more from those other children than they did from adults. If you look at small-scale indigenous transporting, moving around communities today, that's still the case. And it's still the case that children will be spending more time with children than they do with adults. So our perspective has kind of changed because we now expect children to be with an adult pretty much all the time, forgetting that that's a relatively modern thing.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I just had a funny thought. Okay, so we we're looking at children's play or lack of access to play maybe as other generations, or schools are different, and or social, then we start to think about social media and children's mental health, and it's declining, and people are blaming the phone or blaming all these things. But it could be that now children are just spending so much time with adults, it is making them depressed.
This is the Peter Gray route.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, maybe that's not a funny thought at all, but just the idea that they're hanging out with adults so much, that they are controlling the. I mean, so then we can really talk about where it's not funny, but it is true.
Mm-hmm. Let me describe for you a piece of work that my mate Chris did, who was also a British playworker. Okay. For his playwork bachelor's degree, he did a thing that he called his 3 streets study.
Okay.
Which was a study of 3 streets in our home city that were very old streets. And he interviewed children who were 8 years old with a big map and got them to say what they did, where they did it, where they went after school, etc., which he marked on this map. But then he did the same interview with people who had lived down those streets when they were 8 years old, but were of a parents' group. So they were the parents of these kids that he'd spoken to. And their experience was very different. They spent much more time outside than the 8-year-old group. They spent more time without an adult present, with other children. They roamed for greater distances. So they were spending more time outside and more time in the company of other children. But then he did a grandparents group. And the grandparents group from those same 3 streets just were outside all the time, without adults ever around. But he did this in the late 1980s. And I've pestered him lots to say, you need to do that again. Do that again now to see what the answer would be like now, because I think we could guess that it would be even more different from then.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the really interesting things that came out from that thing was the kids group came up with a character that they called the Red Bag Man. And the Red Bag Man was a homeless fella who roamed the streets carrying all his possessions in these red bags. And when the adults were told about this, they got quite worried about this, saying there's some weird stranger wandering around the streets. Until some of them started to say, wait a minute, didn't we have a character called the Bagman? And the Bagman was exactly the same character, but without the red bags. They were now just plain bags. And the same character cropped up in the grandparents group as well. Clearly not the same person, but the same character that's been transmitted from child to child. And that child to child transmission, that folklore or child lore form of transmission, is something that relies on other children to be able to spread those things to. And if children are spending more time in the company of adults than they are with children, it suggests that that kind of transmission would be in danger, which it kind of is. It doesn't go away completely, but it certainly seems to have reduced a little bit. The whole idea, I think, is that children's lives have changed. And despite the fact that people will point to the computer games, spending more time in out-school services and all this stuff, the thing that has changed more than anything else is the amount of time that they spend with other children and without an adult.
Agreed. Yeah. Parents are, I mean, it could be smaller families, right? What contributes to that?
Fewer cousins, fewer brothers and sisters, fewer playmates. That's bound to have an effect.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard Peter Gray talk about bigger houses now, in North America anyway. So there's more room, so parents aren't like get outside where all the other kids are. Yeah, and kids as
Yeah,
being pack animals versus being under the wing of the adult.
indeed. There's another one that comes to mind. There's a paper in a history archaeological journal. Can't remember the name of the person who wrote it, but she had a look at the remains of a colonial homestead in the US dating from the 1600s. And the buildings had gone, but you could still see where the buildings were being. And this group of archaeologists did a finds analysis, basically looking for objects in this space. And they found two clusters of objects relating to children. And one of the clusters was in the far corner of the field, the place where the homestead had been growing its own food. So they were well away from the homestead, but still within eyesight. But the biggest cluster was around where the kitchen doorstep had been. So the kids had obviously been chased out of the house,
Uh-huh.
but their main place to play was on the steps leading into the kitchen. So they were not that far away from home. And I can imagine that if you have a bigger house and if you've got a garden, which many places still don't have, of course, then yeah, maybe there's less encouragement for you to get out the house and go and play elsewhere because you've got, what the adults think is what you need within arm's reach.
Uh-huh. That is funny.
And it's quite interesting to note that the accredited first adventure playground in the world in Emdrup in Copenhagen in Denmark was started for a whole host of reasons. One of the reasons it was started was because more than 80% of the children that were living in that area lived in high-rise accommodation with no garden.
Okay.
So the only place that they had to play was outside, away from the house, in the little green spaces around the house instead.
Mm-hmm. So they'd spill out, and there they were.
Yeah, I know Sorensen is quite often quoted as saying that he didn't build a playground with the expectation of children to go to it. He built the playground where children already were.
Mm-hmm. Well, if we think where they are now, and they are around adults so much at home, after school, on weekends, and school, and early care, and there's around with so many adults. Okay, so your mission seems to be to help those adults see the light, to give them tools, to give them ideas of like, okay, we know how important it is, we know how historic it is, we know how it is like the natural way, and we also adults, we can get in the way. What is your mission, and how are you helping people to embrace kind of play?
Well, if you think about the early years context at the moment,
Yeah.
one of the things I quite often say to early years places and to primary schools, elementary schools as well, is that many of the children that go to your place don't get outside the house as often as they would like, and they don't have the kind of neighborhood environments that they would like. So your place really needs to become something compensatory. It needs to make up for the fact that they're not getting to go to the places and do what they want by choice. So your places really have to be greener, more playable, and your children need to spend more time in those places than you might otherwise have thought.
Yeah.
Because you're literally giving them what they need that they can't find anywhere else. Now, in an early years context, that's easier because most of what an early years place does happens outside. In a primary school, that's trickier because playtimes, recess times have been drastically reduced since the 1970s. In the United States, that's even more of a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And in most places around the world, people find finding a bit shocking, but there is quite often no legal requirement for a school to provide recess or playtime periods. There is usually a law that says you have to provide a lunchtime, But that's quite often a historical throwback to the times when schools had two sessions, a morning session and an afternoon session, which might have different children. And so the lunchtime session was time to eat a meal, but also time to reset the school to get ready for a new bunch of children coming. So that is a little bit of an issue when it comes to primary schools, because as soon as a learning issue crops up, schools quite often turn around and say, well, we need more time for instruction.
Yep.
In the early years, that's not so much an issue, although again, it's probably more of an issue in the United States than it is in other parts of the world, because the word play is still quite often seen as a bit of a dirty word in some respects.
Yeah.
And the United States has a real issue with the time thing, because within the early years and the primary years, there are results that early year settings and schools in the US have to meet, and they have to meet them within a particular time frame. And sometimes the only way of doing that is by cramming learning. And cramming learning not only is a short-term thing, the effects just simply don't last very long. But it does get around this awkward problem of not knowing what children are doing when they're playing. It's very, very difficult to put a time restraint on children's learning when it comes to playing, because they're not very good at sticking with a lesson plan. Lesson plans work for set-piece lessons. They don't really work for play approaches. And so if we can persuade early year settings and schools that learning is something which is good, and we know it's good because governments put tax dollars into it, but some ways of learning are actually better than others if you take away this time constraint. And then if we get people used to the idea that your place has to be better than the local neighborhood where children are living in the context of playing, that's a really important starting point, because people begin to relax more into the idea that children are playing, which otherwise would be interpreted as them not doing anything.
Okay, so we're trying for hearts and minds here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the legislative route is something that in a playwork context we've tried to use in the past. For example, in the late 1980s, we got very, very excited when the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child had an article in it specifically about playing, Article 31. We got very excited about it because it meant that we could go to providers like local government and say, look, you have a legal requirement to provide this thing called play because it's in the United Nations Charter on the Rights of the Child.
Yeah.
A document which only one country in the entire world has not ratified. I don't know if you can guess which one that is.
What kind of country would not ratify the rights of the child?
Exactly. But that kind of backfired a little bit, because despite the fact that governments may have signed up to it, it's not very often included within sovereign legislation. So there's a bit of a mismatch. And Article 31 has quite often been referred to as the forgotten article, because it doesn't have the weight behind it that we actually expected it to. So the legislative thing is not necessarily the most effective way to go, but it's what you said earlier. It's the hearts and minds thing. It's actually persuading people that this is a good idea. And once individuals think it's a good idea, that's when we start to win.
Yes. And so that's where I see you. And so for listeners of this podcast, maybe this is their first time encountering Marc Armitage, and they may see you, this might be like, he's the Socrates of play, with such knowledge and breadth and background and experiences. And yeah, in Australia, or I should say, and in Australia, you are, I think of you as like a play rock star that hold conferences. You do tours, you do speaking tours. People are following you on social media, at your, I want to know the latest from Marc Armitage. And so you are inspiring, and then you do a lot of work with the early years, and they love you, and you've captured hearts and minds, and that's making the difference. So there's the legislative that's big, but then there's also coming for those hearts and minds. But What are you telling those people? What are you? How are you inspiring them? What are your goals, and what do they love about it? And what are they trying? What are they doing? What's your successes, or what's your advice for all these people as you, jet around?
Well, I do have merch, Rusty.
I want it.
I have a merch table at conference.
Good.
Both in the early years context and in other contexts, I don't really do anything that is particularly different from what other play workers in my position would do, which is we actually point out what children are doing. We actually encourage them to stand still and watch and listen and not dive in quite so much anymore. Yeah, and they suddenly realize that the thing that they constantly turn around and say children don't do, they are actually doing. And I always find it fascinating. If I do professional development stuff or I do play audit or do any of these kind of things, if I'm saying to people, now you need to spend a bit more time watching, listening, that very act changes the way that people within that setting view questions are playing. And it means kind of, it's almost as if my work is done at that because they begin to work it out for themselves. Although obviously I'm doing the technical stuff about showing people this is how you do it, this is what you need to take into account. But as long as people have kind of got that thing broken, that false idea that children don't play anymore, they need absolutely everything provided for them, that's the starting point for other stuff. So I've lost count of the number of times I've done play audits within primary and elementary schools, for example. And 4, 5, 6 years later, you can still see the effect of having told the adults in the school, this is the results of your play. Because they've opened their eyes and their ears and noticed. There is still that thing that I said earlier, though, that we have to constantly redo it. Things change. Now, I'll give you a practical example. There was a primary school in Melbourne that I worked with quite a lot when I first got here in Australia, who became very, very play friendly. They went down the loose parts route. They lengthened the time for recess. In fact, added a second recess period that they didn't before. They chilled out about a lot of the risk and danger kind of elements. And things were going really, really well. The staff really started to pay attention to what was going on around them. And then one year they had a really bad NAPLAN score. NAPLAN in Australia is the kind of the national educational scoring of schools tests, standard assessment test, I think. And they had a really bad NAPLAN. They got very bad scores, in particular for language literacy. And within literally months, the second recess period that they'd added was taken away. Recess was reduced in time. Loose part stuff started to be reduced, and some staff left as a result of these changes. But it went back to that because people went back to the idea that, well, we're a place of education. We have to teach people. We have these scores to keep up, and we're not doing very well. And so forth, we need to go back to the more didactic, face-to-face teaching, forgetting the fact that their children were a damn sight happier than they had been 4 or 5 years before, and they'd seen things like their attendance levels skyrocketing because children wanted to go to school. Children were healthier, they were fitter. But those are the things that are not usually included within national schools' scoring systems.
Happiness.
Who cares if kids are happy? Yeah, who cares?
Yeah, thinking about that line of advocacy on the higher levels.
Yeah, and we do it through other events. We do it through conference events, and we do it from seminar events. And one of the things that I do, particularly in terms of going on tour, is I try desperately to get people from different work sectors in the same room at the same time, which is really, really hard to do, particularly trying to get early years people and primary school people in the same room is really, really hard. But it's valuable because as soon as you do that, for one, the primary school people pick up on the emphasis on playing that the early years people are already doing and get very interested. But they all start to realize that the issues are actually very similar from one sector to the other. And of course, if you don't meet together and talk to each other, you don't realize that.
Hmm.
And the biggest successes I think that we ever have is when we suddenly get early years people being more involved in the first 1, 2, 3 years or so of primary school, which suddenly becomes more playful and more relaxed,
Hmm.
and it works better for their kids.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great because then the primary schools can be inspired and remember play. Yeah, right. Just for the fact that people are talking about it.
Hmm.
Yeah, because it's not what
Exactly.
that might not be what they're talking about at just the primary
Exactly.
meetings. It's interesting with I've been reading some AI and jobs and the future and children and education and I just read something about that what the future really is going to need from people are the soft skills of like being human, of working together with others, right? Collaboration, resilience, and those things that aren't the reading, writing, arithmetic, even though that stuff, of course, is important. And it's like I think about like for me, I'm always like, wait, that is play. That is just having that kind of freedom and working with kids and working things out, and it seems like that could be a route in also.
Yeah, that suggests a couple of things. One is that very, very famous Einstein quote, that all children are scientists. What they do is science because of their exploration. Well, interestingly, of course, Einstein never said that, never said anything like that. It's a completely made up quote, but it is completely true. And an awful lot of that inquiry that children quite naturally do when they're playing is a skill that many of us lose when we get into adulthood. Whereas the thing that makes that work in childhood is the fact that life isn't real. And if life isn't real, it doesn't have real consequences. And if it doesn't have real consequences, you're free to experiment with things, knowing that even if it goes completely wrong, you're going to be fine. Well, adults can't do that. Adults are completely trapped into the real world with real consequences. And so find it difficult to do that kind of thing without worrying about what other people are going to do. I was great and good late American Bernie DeCoven said that playfulness is an attitude, and playfulness is about not looking over your shoulder. It's about not worrying who's watching and listening what you're doing and getting on with it. Children are quite notorious for stopping playing if they realize an adult is watching and paying too much attention to them.
Exactly. Right. Shh, quiet.
And so,
there.
exactly. And so, in that context, children are quite naturally mini little explorers because it's inherent in the fact that they exist within this not real world. So there is an element there of saying that children need to be able to continue doing that because they are going to be the innovators and the thinkers of the future. And if we restrict them from doing that, then it makes sense that it might restrict that possibility in the future too. There's a second thing which I find interesting in this. There's a regular gig that I do about the realities of playing, looking at how children have played in the past and comparing that to how children play now. Of course, very little difference between the two, which people become surprised about. But I point out lots of the things that have been blamed for destroying childhood and destroying children being able to play. For example, when you and I were younger, it was very definitely the television that got the blame. Television was teaching bad language, it was making us antisocial, more violent, stopping us from going outside, etc. And those are exactly the same things that the screen device gets the blame for. So the handheld computer game, for example, gets lots of this, the iPad and other kind of pad type things. But in recent years, I've tended to finish those gigs by saying, you can guarantee that the fear over the screen will eventually be replaced by something. And we don't know what it is, or we might not be able to predict it, but something will take over the fear of the screen. Well, now I think we can see what it is, because we are starting to see more articles, more words being written about the dangers to children's play from AI than anything else. And it looks as if the AI fear is going to take over the fear of the screen in general. And that's going to be the thing that gets the blame. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is it's not going to kill playing. Playing is going to keep going, whether we've got AI in the world or not. But what people kind of keep forgetting is in the context of things like AI, where is it coming from? And it's coming from young, highly motivated, engineer type, thinker type people who are capable of doing that because of the fact that they played when they were kids. Who invented all the interesting technological stuff that we blame for the death of play? Very young people are the people that invent this stuff. And they do so largely because of the fact that they played when they were young.
Yes, yes. And they're still playing with ideas, playing with possibilities. Yeah.
Yeah, which is the thing I think that links it with the Einstein quote, because children are young explorers and young inventors, and that does travel with them through into adulthood. So it would be wrong to stop children or restrict children from doing that kind of idea, because it would mean that we won't have these new interesting inventions in the future.
Right. If one generation just cuts off the new thing that's happening, the new wave. Yeah. Well, Mark, you've given me a lot to think about.
Well, that makes a change.
Oh man. Well, this is a conversation that could go on for days and years, and so I hope it does.
Yeah. And in the occasional pub between you and I, it has.
Yes, it has. The Melbourne rooftop pubs.
Yeah, let's not talk about Madame Brussels. What happens in Madame Brussels stays in Madame Brussels.
Oh my gosh, man.
And for people that are not aware of Melbourne culture, that's a very, very famous rooftop bar in Melbourne.
Ah, yes, I think we had a few ciders on one of those rooftops there. Yay. Well, yeah, we might as well just stop, because we could just keep going. But, we got to give people a break.
And it's going to get warm here, so that me staying outside.
Oh, man, rubbing it in there. Summertime in Australia.
Yes. Yep, it's going to be 34 degrees centigrade today.
Okay.
For your American listeners, centigrade is the proper measurements that we use in most parts of the world. Not your funny Fahrenheit stuff.
Fahrenheit. Well, we got that from you Brits, right?
God does.
Oh my gosh. Well, so great to chat. I have other questions for you, but let's do it again. Let's do it again. Thank you so much. Do you have any parting thoughts for our listener?
Only that I've recently started a new online thing called the Play Glossary.
Okay, yes. What's that?
Which is it's a list of over 300 words related to playing and playwork, and it's been populated by words bit by bit. So I think there's about 20 words on there, which you can find on my website. Just search for Marc Armitage, and it's Mark with a C.
Okay.
And it's called the Play Glossary.
Okay.
And there will be new words going onto that this weekend as well. So eventually we'll have 300 plus words on it, and links to play theorists and to interesting books, to things like that. And it's effectively just a huge alphabetical list.
Yes. Okay. What an amazing resource. I want to dive in. Do you have a favorite word that's on there now, or it's coming?
We had a little thing here going on in Australia where I put the first set of words up, and a couple of people said, "Where's the word annihilation?" Because annihilation is a big thing in a playwork context.
Yes.
So I had to put the word annihilation up. So that's a fun one.
Is that
also is it?
I was just saying,
is at the top of the list at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I also had a little bit of a poll the other day, and I gave people a choice of two terms. Did you want dark play or deep play to be the next one? and dark play 1. So
Ah,
that's the latest word that went up the other day.
okay.
And I think there's about another 8 or 9 words planned for this weekend as well. So it's getting bigger and bigger.
Okay. Awesome. Well, we will all go and search it out and learn some words. Dive deep in the
Excellent.
world of Marc Armitage. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty.
Yeah, good seeing you. All right. Thanks for listening. Do you have a comment or a question? Email me at playnaturepodcast@gmail.com. You know I like talking about this stuff. And maybe we could use your question on a future podcast episode. As always, I have some free goodies for you in the show notes, including my outdoor loose parts guide. Fun stuff in there. And so I wish you the best in your outdoor play adventures. And when it comes to adding nature to your yard, or loose parts, or saying yes to risky play, my favorite motto is dream big, start small, and never stop. Oh yeah. Woo, 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 woo. Let's do it. All right. Have fun out there.